Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling like you said everything you had to, yet somehow still lost? That lingering tightness in your throat, like every word drained you instead of empowering you? Maybe you're surrounded by voices that overpower rather than speak. People who interrupt, mock, command the room with a fake confidence so loud it drowns out reason. And maybe you've been taught that staying quiet means surrendering, that silence equals weakness, that not clapping back means you're conceding defeat. But what if that idea is completely backward? What if the real strength lies not in the words you say, but in the ones you choose not to? Nietzsche, often misquoted and more often misunderstood, grasped a truth most avoid. Those who speak endlessly expose themselves. The louder the voice, the more desperate the need to be heard. And desperation is never power. Society conditions us to believe every opinion must be defended, every accusation countered. But nature plays a subtler, sharper game. One that doesn't rely on noise, but on presence. Nietzsche saw silence not as emptiness, but as a force. A disarming, heavy force that unbalances the other. That exposes insecurity not through confrontation, but through stillness. This message is for those who feel like their voice disappears in the chaos. For those who smile while being overlooked. Who stay composed while others trample boundaries. For those who are told their calmness is weakness. Maybe you mistook your silence for powerlessness, but today, you'll discover that silence is a strategy. And often, the most commanding move you can make is no move at all. Let's reframe the way you see silence. Not as retreat, but as a form of dominance. And through Nietzsche's lens, let's learn how to control the room, without raising your voice once. Why do we feel this relentless urge to respond, to argue back, to correct the record? Because deep down, we've been wired to believe that truth must always be defended, that silence is a concession, that staying quiet means defeat. But Nietzsche saw things differently. He saw this impulse not as strength, but as a sign of deep-rooted fear. Fear of appearing weak. And beneath that fear, ego. A brittle ego that panics when challenged, that interprets disagreement as danger, and that turns every conversation into combat. According to Nietzsche, people rarely argue to uncover truth. They argue to assert dominance, to reinforce shaky beliefs, not because they're true, but because questioning them would shake the ground beneath their feet. In this light, argument isn't wisdom, it's armor. It's the ego yelling out, trying desperately to keep control of the story. So what happens when you feel the urge to justify yourself, to make your case? You've already taken the bait, because needing to explain yourself means you're still hooked on being liked, approved of, understood. Nietzsche called this the morality of the herd, the mindset of those who live to fit in, to be seen as reasonable, righteous, acceptable. But this chase for approval is exactly what keeps you powerless. Real strength, he argued, isn't about persuading others, it's about having no need to. It's about standing firm in your truth even when you're ridiculed, dismissed, or ignored. It's about being misunderstood and remaining unmoved. The kind of power Nietzsche admired isn't loud, it's silent. It's the kind that doesn't flinch when provoked, that grows stronger in stillness. The moment you stop reacting, that's when you start to win. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Most discussions are theater, and the first to rise and perform, already lost. Nietzsche understood that the reactive mind is the mind on a leash. The one who watches, who doesn't need to play along, that's the real threat. That's the one no one can control. So then, if we don't respond, how do we assert power? If words are a trap, how do we make our presence felt? Nietzsche's answer lies in the concept of the Übermensch, the one who rises above herd values, who commands reality, not through force, but through unshakable self-mastery. And that's where we're going next, into the mind of the Übermensch, into a world where silence isn't absence, it's control. If this message is resonating with you, hit that subscribe button and support the channel. Your presence here means everything. Nietzsche never wrote to comfort the masses. His words were for the rare few, those willing to confront their own darkness and forge it into something powerful. To him, the average person lives shackled by norms, guilt, and the constant hunger for validation. But beyond this crowd, there exists a different kind of being, uncommon, untamed, untouchable. The Übermensch, the overman, doesn't react to the world, he bends it. And his most potent tool: silence. He doesn't need to argue. He doesn't play emotional chess or waste breath proving points. He watches, he listens, he calculates every moment, and he knows exactly when to hold back. Because he's discovered what most never will. Silence is a weapon, a language of power, not meant to explain, but to dominate. The silence of the Übermensch carries weight. It's not a void, it's a warning. It radiates control. It speaks louder than any scream ever could. While the world is busy shouting, pleading, defending, he stands still, and that stillness commands. His silence isn't emptiness, it's armor, it's presence, it's pressure. And in the tension his silence creates, others crack. They ramble. They reveal too much. They misstep, trying to fill a space that was never theirs to fill. His silence isn't indifference. It's discipline. It's energy held back like a coiled spring. Every word left unspoken is a move not wasted, a secret not exposed. The Übermensch doesn't stay silent because he's uncertain. He stays silent because he doesn't owe anyone a reaction. He has nothing to prove, and that makes him dangerous. Because in his quiet, others hear themselves, and most people cannot bear to listen to their own minds. In a world obsessed with noise, those who master stillness are sovereign. Nietzsche saw the Übermensch as a rule breaker, a value creator, someone whose self-worth isn't borrowed from anyone else's approval, and that's what makes him terrifying. He can't be guilted, shamed, or manipulated. His silence is a force field, and when he finally chooses to speak, his words are not just heard, they shift the ground beneath them. But this brings us to a deeper question. Why does silence unsettle people so much? Why does not reacting cause more chaos than any outburst ever could? The answer lies in the mechanics of the human mind. And in the next section, we'll explore that hidden battlefield, where silence doesn't just speak, it controls. Silence isn't just the absence of sound, it's a spotlight. And for many, what it illuminates is terrifying. When you choose not to react, you're not merely withholding a response, you're forcing the other person to confront their own words, their own thoughts, without the comfort of distraction. And that unnerves them. Because most people don't speak to express truth. They speak to cover it up, to reinforce the image they want to project, to drown out the silence that reminds them of their own contradictions. And when your silence offers no pushback, the mask starts to slip. Psychologists have long observed this. In tense interactions, silence is often perceived as a verdict. Even if you're just observing, the other person begins to sweat, to spiral. Why? Because your silence robs them of control. Without your reaction, their narrative starts to collapse. The brain's threat detectors, the amygdala, kick in. Paranoia creeps in. Is he analyzing me? Did I say too much? Does she see through me? In that mental chaos, silence isn't passive. It's a precision strike, unseen, but deeply felt. Nietzsche saw this long before the science. He knew that most people are slaves to their impulses, rushing to react, driven by pride, terrified of being ignored. But the elevated soul, the one who rules himself, chooses silence. Because every word is ammunition, every reaction is a giveaway, and power is lost when too much is revealed. Manipulators are especially vulnerable to this. Their control depends on your emotional engagement. If you don't play the game, the script falls apart. And when you stay silent, they flinch. They need your reaction to anchor themselves. Without it, they unravel. Their facade disintegrates. The very thing they tried to conceal is exposed. But it goes deeper than tactics. Silence also activates old wounds, abandonment, shame, rejection. It reminds people that they're not the center of the universe, that their words might not matter, that their presence might not register. And nothing terrifies the narcissistic ego more than irrelevance. So when you choose silence, you're not retreating. You're striking at the core of illusion. You're pulling back the curtain. You're letting their own insecurities devour them from within. That's why silence takes strength. It's uncomfortable. It goes against our conditioning, our need to explain, to defend, to be seen. But that's exactly why it's powerful. Because it requires mastery, and mastery is real dominance. Now that you understand how silence operates, how it triggers anxiety, disrupts manipulation, and exposes the truth, it's time to go further. To stop watching from the sidelines and start wielding silence with purpose. In the next part, you'll learn how to use silence not as retreat, but as a surgical tool. How to dismantle arguments, unmask deception, and assert control without saying a single word. Because theory means nothing without application. And silence, when used with precision, stops being passive. It becomes a blade, one you'll soon know how to wield with deadly accuracy. The first move is deceptively simple, but ruthlessly difficult. Stay silent when every part of you aches to speak. It demands discipline, because your instinct will scream for release. It will urge you to defend, to explain, to push back. But that urge, that's the chain. That's the proof you're still tethered to their approval, still entangled in their game. Real silence begins the moment you sever that need. When you realize you owe no one an explanation. That truth does not need a voice to be real. The second weapon is awareness. While others ramble, scramble to justify themselves, and fill every pause with noise, you listen. Not like someone waiting for a turn, like a strategist gathering intelligence. You catch what they don't realize they're revealing, their fears, the slips, the subtle contradictions, the ego masked as certainty. You collect all of it. Because when, and only when, you decide to speak, it won't be reactive. It will be precise, lethal. The words of someone who has already mapped the terrain of the other's psyche. The third weapon, silence as duration. Let it linger. Let the void stretch. Because silence creates pressure, and pressure exposes. While they speak, anticipating your reply, and it never comes, the tension eats at them. They project, they guess, they unravel. One look from you, held long enough, can shatter more defenses than a flood of carefully chosen words. The fourth, unpredictability. Silence makes you unreadable, and people fear what they can't predict. When they don't know your next move, they lose their rhythm. They hesitate. They censor themselves. You shift the dynamic, no longer the responder. You become the axis. The silence no longer feels empty. It feels magnetic, inescapable. In that moment, silence is no longer a lack of voice. It's a full takeover. But tread carefully. Don't mistake this for submission. Nietzsche never romanticized fragility. The silence we speak of here is charged, alive with intent. You're not withholding out of fear. You're positioning yourself, like a drawn bow waiting for the exact second to release. And when that moment comes, when the silence has pulled every string tight, you speak. One line, one sentence that doesn't just end the argument, it ends the need for one. But this leads us to a darker place, because silence, as powerful as it is, can also be a prison. Not every quiet moment is a strategy. Sometimes it's a cry from someone who's been cornered. Sometimes silence is not power, but surrender. Not poise, but paralysis. There are situations where people aren't trying to debate you. They're draining you, manipulating you, feeding off your restraint, and without noticing, you become a source of energy they don't even have to ask for. You're being controlled, and not a word needs to be said. This is the shadow side of silence, when it stops being a weapon and becomes a wound. In the next section, we'll expose this hidden form of domination, the kind that happens quietly, slowly, under the illusion of peace, because while you've been avoiding conflict, someone else may be thriving off your submission. And Nietzsche, he saw this long before the rest of us caught on. What could be more twisted than being silenced? It's being trained to believe that silence is your only option, that holding your tongue, suppressing your anger, stepping aside for the sake of peace is a virtue, that silence is balance, that non-confrontation is maturity. But what if that's not maturity at all? What if it's quiet surrender disguised as wisdom? Nietzsche saw this illusion for what it was. Most people's so-called peace is simply a tamed resignation. Think about it. How many times have people taken advantage of your composure? Your willingness to listen, to let things slide, to avoid escalation. They speak louder, push harder, take up space that was never theirs to claim, and you stand there, still. You tell yourself it's not worth the trouble, that staying calm is the higher ground, that keeping the peace matters more than proving a point. But here's the raw truth. That kind of peace comes at a brutal cost. And the worst part? The people around you know you won't resist. That's why they keep pushing. Nietzsche described this dynamic as the morality of slaves, a belief system born out of weakness. It glorifies obedience. It celebrates guilt. It tells you that disappearing, softening yourself, shrinking to fit is moral. And you're even praised for it. But Nietzsche didn't write for those who kneel. He wrote for those ready to break the leash. For those who wake up and realize, I've been complicit in my own erasure. When your silence is born from fear, from avoidance, from wanting to please, you're not in control. You're a puppet for the expectations of others. You've handed over the steering wheel of your life without even noticing. And this is the exact opposite of Nietzsche's idea of the will to power. Power isn't about shouting louder than everyone else. It's about reclaiming authorship of your story. To choose silence not because you're scared to speak, but because you don't need to. This old submissive silence must die. And in its place, a new silence must rise. A silence of grounded presence. A silence that does not bow. That does not flinch. That does not apologize for taking up space. A silence that, simply by existing, shifts the energy in the room. That's the silence Nietzsche honored. The silence of the one who owns themselves entirely. But how do you get there? How do you transform from someone who's quietly exploited into someone whose silence commands respect? How do you kill the sheep inside you and awaken the being who doesn't need to raise their voice to rule? The answer lies in Nietzsche's boldest idea, the Übermensch. We've spoken about him, but now it's time to become him. In the next and final chapter, you'll uncover what it takes to embody this evolved human. Because the world doesn't need more noise. It needs those who master silence and lead through it. We've arrived at the end. And there's one thing you need to absorb, clearly, deeply, without distortion. Silence is not absence. It is not a void. It is not the gap between one thought and the next. Real silence is presence in its purest form. It is control. It is proof that you're no longer reacting to life, but bending it to your will by simply existing. Nietzsche didn't write for the ones satisfied with staying afloat. He wrote for the ones ready to evolve, to rip away the layers they never chose, even when it burns, even when it breaks everything they thought they were. The silence of the Übermensch isn't the silence of the silenced, or the silence of fear. It's the silence of a warrior who walks into a room already victorious. No need for noise, no need for display. He knows. Knows who he is. Knows what he's worth. Knows that nothing needs to be said when everything is already embodied. Now turn your gaze inward. How many times have you bitten your tongue, not out of power, but out of fear? How often have you stayed quiet to keep the peace, to avoid being too much, to stay likable? How often have you given others the steering wheel? Let them define your path, your worth, your voice. It ends here. Nietzsche would call that kind of silence a betrayal of life itself. A quiet self-erasure. And it's time to end it. From this moment forward, your silence must evolve. No longer a retreat, but a silent declaration of power. A living boundary. A radiant force that speaks even when your lips do not. Because your essence doesn't need to be explained, it needs to be lived. And that demands courage. So I ask you, do you have it? Then write it below. Declare it. Not just for me, but for yourself. I choose the silence that commands respect. Say it, type it, own it, because even words about silence can build empires inside you. And don't stop here. There's another level waiting. The next video will deepen everything you've just awakened and stretch your perspective even further. Watch it. Not to support this channel, but to honor yourself. And remember this: the weak scream, the strong stand still. The wise decide when to speak.